All societies around the world have a significant role for families in their culture. Providing children with emotional and physical support is the primary function of the family. It is the most important factor in a child's development. A family can take many forms, and the concept of family itself has evolved over time. In some cases, it doesn't even have to be two biological parents and their children involved. A family can be anyone who has supported and nurtured you throughout your childhood. All humans require unconditional love. So what happens to children who, for whatever reason, lack parents or whose parents fail to provide a safe environment for them to live in? Hopefully, they will have relatives such as grandparents, aunts, or uncles who can assist them in obtaining the necessary housing and care. This is not always the case, and some children are left to fend for themselves. In the United States, the traditional orphanage no longer exists. Rather than being adopted, these children are placed in foster care. This is either a group home or a home with foster parents, where they will remain until they are reunited with their family or until they reach the age of independence. Also, if you've not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now back to the story. Detective Jack Mook is a 22-year veteran of the Pittsburgh police force. As a detective, he spends more time observing bad actors, getting to know them, and getting deeper into their lives. He works his way into those lives in order to understand why they behave the way they do. Jack instinctively deployed his detective tactics in a situation that turned out to be one of the biggest blessings in his life. In his day-to-day life, he was regarded by his colleagues in the department as a quote-unquote man's man, a name bestowed on him for his long years of being single. He had always lived a single life, feeling that things suited him better and were much easier without too many responsibilities. Though Jack had to develop a tough persona for the sake of his job, he was a very caring and passionate person who was big on giving back to his community. In his free time, he would volunteer at Steel City Boxing Gym, a non-profit organization that helps disadvantaged kids learn how to box, teaching boxing to underprivileged kids in the neighborhood. Aside from the boxing skills they received, the training they received at the boxing gym instilled in them discipline and provided them with a sense of empowerment and companionship. Jack came into contact with underprivileged children both in his line of work as a detective and in his normal life. Mook met Josh, a wiry 14-year-old who could juke and jab punching bags and opponents alike. About 6 years ago, when the boy came to the gym on Homer Street in Spring Hill, Pittsburgh, his brother, Jesse, 11, soon followed. Mook soon began coaching Josh and learned about the brother's troubled home life. Quote, "He was so skinny you could see his ribcage," said Mook, who would take Josh out to eat along with other trainers at the city. "I've been a bachelor my whole life, so around the table, I see now how at a dinner table you get conversation. That's how we kind of got together. We built a rapport." Jack took a particular liking to Josh because of his commitment and drive towards boxing. Quote, "Those 2 hours a day kept us out of a lot of trouble," unquote, said Josh in a later interview. Quote, "I knew I could go there and forget about everything else," unquote. He also began to train Jesse, who opened up more about their situation, and then he understood why exactly they came to the gym. Though he felt saddened to know about their condition, there was nothing much he thought he could do, as most of the kids who trained at the boxing gym also suffered from the same plight. Quote, "I just thought it was none of my business as long as he's coming to the gym and he's got the energy," unquote. As Mook later revealed in an interview, Josh and Jesse used the gym as a way to escape and forget their problems. The brothers lived with their parents, who were addicts who couldn't care for themselves, let alone their children. They lived in a dilapidated home filled with roaches and rats. Due to the inability of the parents of the boys to provide properly for them and the unsanitary condition of their home, they lost custody of the boys. They went to live with their aunt and uncle. They would show up at the boxing club and tell him they'd been sleeping on the floor. He worked with them for years until they stopped showing up. From the moment the boys stopped showing up, Mook got worried. He understood what the gym meant to the boys, and having heard complaints from them about their harsh living conditions, he knew something must be wrong. However, he decided to bid his time and see if they would show up. but they never did. So he did what he does every day for a living. He investigated. For the sake of his investigation, he decided to enlist the aid of his police connections. Eventually, he succeeded in tracking down the boys. Though he was glad to find them, he immediately felt pity for them. When he found Joshua, he said, quote, he was exhausted with bags under his eyes. He looked like a 40-year-old man who had just lost his job, unquote. The state Jack found the boys in made his heart ache. He got the boys in the car and started speaking to Josh. As Josh spoke to him, the tears that came down from his eyes and the fear in his voice as he begged Jack to help them caused him to be restless. Through their conversation, Jack learned that the boys' parents no longer had custody of them because of their drug issues and that they were living with their uncle and aunt. Despite that, their conditions only got worse and worse. There was no bed for them to sleep on, so they sometimes slept on the couch, and other times they had to lie on the floor. Jesse complained that the floor was covered in feces and fleas. They had decaying teeth because they didn't have any toothbrushes. As Joshua continued to talk to Jack, he opened up about just how bad things had become. Quote, "Coach, we have to sleep on the floor and there's nothing but dog feces on the floor," unquote, the teenager confessed. He cried as he went on explaining things to his boxing coach. Quote, "I'm trying to sleep my life away. I got to sleep as early as possible so I can sleep until I have to go back to school," unquote. Mook knew for sure how bad things must be for a kid to try to sleep his life away as a means to cope with his everyday life. Even for a cop who had seen cases of this extremity, the boy's story was too much to bear, especially for them as kids. He was determined to help the kids, but not quite sure how. He then asked Josh to look after his brother and hang on tight. Later that night, as he entered his house, he suddenly felt selfish and guilty for leaving the kids to go through hell for another night, whereas there was enough room in his house to accommodate them. It was then that Jack made the decision to become the legal guardian of the boys. When Jack applied to become their guardian and wanted custody of the boys, a caseworker told him that wouldn't be necessary as the boys were in good condition. The tide began to shift in Jack's favor when the uncle of the boys had a run-in with the law. He crashed his car into another car before hitting an embankment on the city's north side. Hard drugs were found in his car after he abandoned it in an attempt to escape the cops. Jack became anxious when he was told of the situation involving the boy's uncle. This was because he realized the boys could have been in the car when he crashed the car and would have certainly been injured. Through his connections, he was able to reach the lawyer who gave custody of the boys to their uncle and aunt, and she put in an emergency order for Jack to become their guardian with immediate effect. City officials then came down to inspect Jack's house. The boys were removed from their uncle's house and sent to their new guardian right after the inspection was completed. With Josh and Jesse now living under his roof as their guardian, Mook knew his life was about to change for good. With the new role of a guardian, Mook for the first time in a long time owed responsibility to somebody other than himself, and in this case, the boys. Mook began to make some adjustments. After all, he had been living life as a bachelor for so long. He couldn't go out as he used to as a single man because he wanted to set a good example for the boys. He stopped ordering takeout. He commented, quote, "I'm in here trying to learn my culinary skills," unquote. Jack Mook was confronted with more than just domestic challenges. He realized that he had to deal with institutions on a daily basis. One of the biggest bumps was navigating the healthcare system for foster children. On a recent visit to Allegheny Suburban Hospital in Bellevue, Mook said the receptionist turned them away because he didn't have the paperwork showing he was Jesse's foster father. Allegheny Health Network spokeswoman Stephanie Wadey said it is a policy at the urgent care facility to require proof of guardianship, though that policy is not in place at emergency rooms. When Jesse had a severe asthma attack, Mook stopped at home on the way to the hospital. Quote, "I knew it was serious, but I had to run home and get the adoption papers. He was going to respiratory failure. I figured, I can't chance this," unquote. Incidents like these make Mook acknowledge that despite the recent changes he had to make, there was still more he could be doing to empower the boys. Jack Mook loved and admired having these young men in his life. He also felt strongly that perhaps the boys should be given a better chance than they have received thus far. He believed that a child should be treated as a child, not as a survivor. Jack Mook applied to adopt the two brothers after consulting with Josh and Jesse. He desired to give them access to a stable home, as well as the opportunity to attend school and become better individuals and functioning members of society. The adoption was finalized a year after Josh and Jesse became foster kids, and they took the surname Mook. On leaving the court, Jack had said to them, quote, "You're happy, right? You happy? Good. Now you're going to go home and cut my grass," unquote. Mook, however, wanted to make certain that their biological parents were not forgotten in all of this. Mook explained that he wanted to ensure that they would continue to be a part of the boys' lives. Mook said, quote, "Their biological dad is still their dad. I want them to be a part of the good things they experience," unquote. Notwithstanding everything that had occurred, yet another thing he hadn't anticipated was the level of publicity he and the boys would end up receiving. The incredibly touching story of this single man who took on two distraught teenagers was picked up by the local news, and the new family quickly became well known in the community. Their fame skyrocketed after their story went viral on the internet. Jack and the two new Mooks were featured not only in the national press but also on websites and social media around the world. They were inundated with messages of encouragement. To Jack's astonishment, a percentage of these messages were from ladies who were voicing a direct interest in him. They contacted him via email and social media, requesting the opportunity to connect with him and possibly go on a date. You'd be relieved to know that Jack did meet a person, but not one who sent him an internet message. He met Mary in a bar one evening, though she admits it wasn't quite as coincidental as it appears. She'd seen a story about him online and wanted to meet him, so she went to a bar she knew he'd frequent, hoping to make an introduction. Her strategy worked out better than she could have imagined. They hit it off straight away and have been part and parcel ever since. They ended up marrying, and Mary brought along her 3 children from a previous marriage to the family. Jack later said this about his marriage, quote, "I thought being single was fun because you don't have any responsibilities, but when you're single, you don't realize what you're missing. I'm glad I let her break through that barrier and take me away from that life," unquote. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and remember to share it with others. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.